I want to, and I guess we should probably move on to season 2 speculation because this is going to get into season 2 speculation. And I'll start it off with the fact that I think I wouldn't want to see the clones just, killed off systematically by sent. Like, yeah, I'd love to see the mistreatment of clones like that, where they send them on death missions. It's basically suicide missions, like the Suicide Squad or something, with Crosshair as the leader. But
Yeah.
but I wouldn't want to see that be how they kill all the clones. Like, the clones need some type of epic ending. They need a true final stand, and I don't want to see them just kind of be like, oh, we're following orders, and oh, now they're killing us all. What are we going to do? I guess nothing. I'd like to see them. I feel like the Clone Wars has established their independence enough to where we need to see them truly be able to stand up for what they believe in. When we slowly have seen characters like the Bad Batch or Rex or Gregor or Hauser in this season all do that type of stuff, and the inhibitor chips at this point are just, I'm just going to act like they don't exist anymore, because I think we've kind of moved past that to where the clones' autonomy from the chips feels like it's something that's coming back. And so I want to see them truly embrace their personalities that we saw them have in the Clone Wars, if they're starting to get those back, and see where they go from being mind controlled to maybe knowing they were mind controlled to now moving on to with this empire that doesn't care about them and trying to blatantly phasing them out, because they're not, one, no more clones are being created, and two, there's these TK troopers that are being sent on all the good missions, and they're just relegated to doing either meaningless jobs or death jobs. And I want to see them really deal with that. And it'd be nice if Crosshair could be that connection to the larger clone army as we get into what I hope ends as a clone show. And I think that's where the crux of this thing is. But any thoughts on that specifically, and maybe season 2 leaning into more clone stuff?
It's gonna be difficult to see how much they can really focus on the clones that aren't Rex or the Bad Batch or Crosshair, in my mind. Um, I mean, we've reached that point in the story where we're invested in just the main group. It wouldn't be bad to follow the main group. Obviously, the Bad Batch are gonna pop into like what looks like disconnected arcs, sort of like the Ryloth arc. Um, and we're gonna also see things like the underworld, I think, be explored. Like what hopefully is that setup with that stupid episode with Sid smuggling things out of her former cantina. Um, I do not think you just bring in the Pikes for no reason and name drop some woman who's supposedly so good in the underground. Um, I think the clone story that we will mostly follow is the one outside of what we have with the Bad Batch, is the one with Rex. I'm still of the opinion that he has a much different thing that he's fighting right now. I don't think he's just standing around doing like misinformation and like, here's all these different things that the Empire isn't telling you. I don't think that's Rex's MO. Like, he's definitely doing things on the field, on the ground, destabilizing and creating chaos. Maybe not as chaotically as the Bad Batch, but I think he's trying to pull whatever regs that he can find into a bit more of like a militia of sorts. Um, I mean, obviously Gregor's with him now. At some point, Wolf is going to happen. Um, I mean, I'd love Hauser to come into this sort of like rebellion of sorts that is kind of frothing at the mouth right now. I'd love to see Lama Su somehow be connected with these like clones that are leaving and stuff. Like, I don't think it's possible to, underestimate at Kaminoan, but I think people are already underestimating. Like, sure, the guard's gonna, but like the Empire is not gonna execute him. The Empire is just gonna reprimand him, strip him of his titles and powers, and then he's gone. But this is a man who definitely has so many unique codes and access points and money that could be used to, you know, bring together weapons and, if anything, maybe even still possibly clone an army. It doesn't necessarily, like I mentioned last week, it doesn't have to necessarily be clones of Django. Can be clones of everyone who's willing to fight, like strong species and aliens. I mean, I don't know how far that'll go. I think that's one of my more weaker like wants of like, oh, clone armies made of clones of different species. But I think it'd be a nice, interesting callback to like the original trilogy fans thinking of like when the Clone Wars happened, it was clones of all these different famous beings and species. Obi-Wan is Obi-Wan, but he just goes by Obi-Wan, right? Like that was a rumor back in the day. It'd be interesting to kind of play off of that and be like, yeah, there was a sort of clone war that continued after the Republic Clone War, right? And that and the Republic underworld wars and all that stuff that were involving clones, because they happened after the Empire came about. Like these clone wars have existed, and I'd like to see maybe something like that happen, and Rex having a part in there. But we also do see that he only has Wolf and Gregor by the end, so I don't know how much of a different species would really play into this. I could see maybe Lama Su doing that separately and doing a sort of like coalition with whoever Rex can manage to pull off and free and liberate of some sorts. Obviously, the Bad Batch, I could see them popping in and helping him out at some points. But I don't know if we're going to even really see the end of the clone story until season 3. I don't think this is a 2-season show now. I think we're at a 3-season show. Because they were so quick to announce even before the finale happened that, like, yeah, season 2 is coming out 2022, presumably more in the later half of 2022. But if it comes out in like May again or June, like, yeah, then I think the story has definitely got 3 seasons worth going to it. Mandalorians are going to have to play a part in the story. We're going to have to see, uh, you know, um, how Bo-Katan loses Mandalore. Right? Obviously, she's not wielding the dark saber at this point, but she is the presumptive leader at this point of the planet. We're gonna have to see how they kind of are split up, or they go into the Imperial Super Commander program. We're gonna have to see maybe to some degree, uh, you know, clones interacting with them. I really think that there's a great avenue for letting these clones actually decide a culture that they're bred from is a culture that they acknowledge. I mean, if Boba Fett is doing it, it makes sense because it's his father who like raised and trained him in the Mandalorian ways and all these different things. But if the clones can also find some sort of like connection to the Mandalorian cultures, the Mandalorian way, and some of them can also join in there, I mean, I think that'd be interesting, being part of that sort of resistance, becoming part of these different families, seeing how true Mandalorians, would say something about, uh, these regular clones who are all made from Django, who was not too well respected by, I'm assuming, by the Mandalorians. And we have a huge point in season 2 in the sort of pickup before the big finale episode where Bo-Katan like snivels at what is it, Boba Fett, and she's like, I've heard your voice 1,000 times before. You're nothing special. I don't think that automatically disconnects people from saying like, okay, it's only that Siege of Mandalore and then Mandalorian. I could see, how clones, even their own ways of trying to become Mandalorians, are shunned and not always accepted into families. Maybe they create their own Mandalorian culture in ways like there was so much done in Legends that I think is still extremely viable and would be done better if you actually change timelines. If you don't, consider how like the Republic War should be more of the focus there instead of like clone commandos suddenly becoming Mandalorians halfway through a war. That doesn't really work. But in the sense when they're on the run, they're trying to find new allies and stuff, trying to find new purpose in their life. How would the Mandalorian code not be, beneficial and powerful to them? I mean, and Django did clone these guys. There's no way he didn't sneak in Mandalorian culture training to some degree into their mindsets when he was flash training them at 2 or 3 years old. That could have been some of the earliest things that they've learned. So I think maybe we see some of that stuff. I think it's stuff that can't be handled in one season. But I'd say either the Mandalorian or the Clone Militia and Lama Suzerul. If one of those three things happens next season, I think that's a great progression. Because I don't think the show creators are just gonna simply write off a chance of having clones and TK troopers who are still loyal to the Empire, killing off clones who are defectors, who have just been bred and stuff like that. I think there's just too much flexibility still there.
The Mandalorian stuff is going to happen, or we're going to get a Mandalorian appearance at some point. I'm just conflicted on whether I think it's going to end up being a part of the show heavily, or if it's going to be kind of like the Hera arc, where it's a couple episodes and maybe the Bad Batch go to Mandalore and it's already occupied by the Empire, and they're trying to smuggle Bo-Katan off the planet or something like that. Like, right. I could see that being the case, and then maybe we have her as like part of that, because Rebels kind of did the same thing where we have a bunch of characters reintroduced, and then they show up once in a while. Like Gregor and Wolf barely show up after season 2 until we get to the finale, and then everybody's there. We could do that with Bad Batch. But I find the Kaminoan stuff really interesting, and they built up so much intrigue about the Kaminoans in this show. Way more intrigue than they were always been interesting and weird, and they've been more interesting in the Legends when we've explored the Sifo Dyas story and the Dooku story and all that pre-episode 1 stuff on how, they really get affiliated with them and with the Sith and with the Jedi and the Republic and how their existence was before any of that affiliation. There's been a lot of interesting stuff in Legends with that, but this is definitely the most any canon thing has ever focused on the Kaminoans. And they were going to flee somewhere in the second to last episode, or the episode 14. And where were they going? Is there a secret society of Kaminoans somewhere? They have like experimental technology they've never shared with the Republic someplace. Do they have super Kaminoans or a different breed of Kaminoans that exists? I would love them to go into that type of stuff. Will they? I don't know. I think that would be really cool. It would also pick up on, because I would say that was one thing that season 1 at least, and this that I was going to say disappointed me, but this could definitely be mended by having this further development in season 2, 3, 4, whatever. But I was so invested in learning more about the Kaminoans and how they built them up as true characters, and then it was just kind of 14. You start off with them, okay, we're going to pick up this arc again, and then Nala Se's captured and Lama Su's. You're supposed to believe he's dead. Obviously, we never heard the gunshots, so he can come back anytime. But for all intents and purposes, he's out of the picture. And is that really going to be how they finish off the Kaminoan stuff? Because right now it seems like Nala Se is just kind of part of this, the whole Mandalorian connection, which I guess we'll probably talk about in a little bit. But Nala Se is going to be a part of the Imperial cloning program that's based on Kaminoan technology and how they, basically rip off everything they do. It would be cool if we saw Nala Se pop up in The Mandalorian season 3. That's a possibility. I think probably unlikely, but at least like as the sole remaining Kaminoan, maybe she's old and like decrepit and being kept alive, almost like Mari Senteca and the High Republic books, where she's kind of this all knowledge, like this oracle type being that knows everything about Kaminoan tech and all this stuff, and they force her to stay alive as they just kind of like use her for the dark side purposes of creating Snoke and clones of Palpatine and all that. But yeah, that's a thread that I would really love to see them pick back up, because it did feel so important, at least for the first 14 episodes of the show, and then it was just kind of like, well, now that's over, and we did pick up with a thread on that in this episode, because it does end. The last scene of the whole episode and of the season is Nala Se being met by an Imperial scientist who's wearing the exact same thing Dr. Pershing was wearing in The Mandalorian, and basically saying, we have a lot of work for you to do. And Nala Se gets this worried kind of look on her face, like, oh gosh, what are they going to make me do now? So we're going to continue the Nala Se thread, because it's directly connected to The Mandalorian. But will we continue with anything else that's not directly connected to The Mandalorian? I would love them to, but I'm not sure. But should we talk about the Mandalorian? And you already mentioned Grogu possibility. I think Grogu is definitely a possibility. Do I want Grogu to show up in the show? I'm not really sure if I want him to show up in the show. That's where it starts to kind of, to me, feel like I'm not a fan of the word fan service, but that's when it just, to me, it doesn't make that much sense, especially if it's a one-off episode for the Bad Batch, just like, oh, we have to save somebody in the Jedi Temple. I wonder who it is, and then he shows up, and they're like, oh my god, it's Grogu, it's Yoda, who it, I can't believe this, and then they send him off with somebody else. Like that would just feel really forced to
Right.
me.
Yeah. No, I get it. I think when I talk about Grogu, I don't mean that he necessarily has to be captured and brought to the Kaminoans. He's obvious. I think it's more of like they identify that this species was so like that someone had this many midichlorians. We have Anakin, who's erased from the map, so we can't do that, even though he's actually Vader. We have Yoda, who is MIA, and we're never going to get around to finding. Oh, who's this kid? Grogu? He's a child? Okay, we can just use him. I think it's more of like the Empire will try to get him. And then I'd like a story, obviously, of like a Jedi or someone or some common person,
Yeah.
going out of their way and saving them and ensuring that doesn't happen. And maybe the Bad Batch provides passage or something. Or, it's not them necessarily being the mission people, but more of like making a quick appearance in that episode, sort of like the Ryloth arc. I
Mhm.
don't. Yeah, I see what you mean. That is too much of a fan service. Like it's the Bad Batch did. I don't think it should be like that. But I think it has to happen in the Bad Batch show, and they have to make a cameo when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could see that happening for sure. There's going to be heavy ties to the Mandalorian as the next show, next canon show we are getting is Book of Boba Fett. Love to see Boba Fett pop up, especially after his connection with Omega. And then after that, we've got season 3 of the Mandalorian, Kenobi, Cassian Andor, all these shows that definitely could tie into what season 2 of the Bad Batch is. It'll be interesting to see if season 2 of the Bad Batch ends up coming out at the same time of any of these shows. I would think there's a possibility that some episodes overlap, especially because you would assume that Bad Batch season 2 would at least be 16 episodes again. So I could see it starting midsummer and maybe overlapping with one episode of Kenobi and maybe one episode of Andor if that's what starts after it. We'll see, but yeah, the Mandalorian connections will be there for sure, and Nala Se, it would be cool if the next time we see Nala Se is in season 3 of Mandalorian, or obviously we're going to see her in season 2 of Bad Batch, so that would be pretty cool. But I personally, another thing I really want in this show is some type of Jedi, and I'm not saying Ahsoka. Like I want another Jedi, and I want to see how the clones, not necessarily the Bad Batch because they were never affected by inhibitor chips, but how the clones deal with working with a Jedi again. Like I would love to see the two of them like in a room. Like it could be anyone. They can make a new Jedi for all I care. I don't care, but I want to see a Jedi and a clone interact post Order 66. And I don't know if we'll ever get that, but that's another wishful thinking thing on my part that I would really like to see how that works. Because Ahsoka helped free Rex. She knew about the inhibitor chips, all that. Imagine a Jedi that doesn't know anything about inhibitor chips, a Jedi and a clone who's like has that guilt from being controlled by an inhibitor chip and what that would be like. I don't know if there's a place for that in the Bad Batch, but I would really like to see that, especially if they get more into clone stuff. And that's kind of it for my things that I really want in season 2. Obviously, a more central focus on the Bad Batch themselves as the means for the clone army. That's the number one thing. If Crosshair gets equal time, I think those are the parts of the show that can really progress well and ultimately turn into making the show special because of its name, not just using them as a backdrop for the rest of the galaxy, which it kind of seemed like we were doing. But any more thoughts on speculation, or do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Uh,
you made a pretty interesting point about like, now say season three. I know there's like a whole legend storyline of like at some point, uh, Boba's uh, DNA starts degrading because he is a clone. He's a pure clone, so Kaminoans have to come and play in that factor. And I would think it'd be a great thing to have some like personal fear of like truly losing your life I mean, this man escaped the Sarlacc and everything, sure, but like those are things that you can imagine the greatest bounty hunter can ever do. But you know, when you're the insides of you are literally degrading and you're losing it to some degree, and you've just taken over Jabba's palace. I mean, I'd love to see something like that in the Book of Boba Fett if that's what they're, you know, possibly doing some more introspective stuff. Um, and obviously, maybe an older Omega appearing would be cool. I don't think it would work in the sort of criminal underworld at this moment for the show. I'd rather see comic characters like Black Kraston and Dr. Aphra and stuff like that make their appearances. Um, it's Dr. Black Chrysanthemum, my bad. But the Super Kaminoans thing got me thinking because you know we like games like Halo and stuff, right? They have these alien species, but then they also have like their like higher god species, and these Kaminoans are out of the galaxy. We haven't really dealt with like deity sort of aliens in Star Wars, not at least in a long time in canon. I think at best you could say like the Queen of Geonosis is kind of like almost like a god, but not even like that. It's just more that because she literally is the mother of all Geonosins. Um, but maybe seeing like a higher council of the Kaminoans. I mean, if they're an extragalactic species already, right, from the Rishi Maze, is it too hard to think that maybe some stuff with the Chiss ascendancy could be linked with their technology? They share a lot of like extreme advanced technology. I don't think it'd be a bad idea for them to start like teasing eventually live action Thrawn and stuff like that. More get people more invested in canon Thrawn's background. Eventually, at some point, I would think that the Chiss ascendancy have to appear in live action. So by the time we get to that Ahsoka series or whenever Ezra and Thrawn are back and presumably in live action, I mean, is it too far of a stretch to think that the Chiss Ascendancy finds them first before, you know, anything of the Resistance or the New Republic or the First Order does? I mean, it would be interesting to see a little bit of a connection between Kaminoan technology and Chiss technology and just more of like that unknown region, wild space, all of those, and even extra. I'd like to see the Star Wars galaxy be willing to acknowledge that other galaxies have an effect on them more than just Camino. I know that the Chiss are part of the galaxy, the Star Wars galaxy, but there's a lot of crazy things that are happening out there, and they're all in the relatively close quadrants of each other. So maybe we can see Lama Su, once he's freed, make way to the higher council who have, you know, brought them into this day and age where the Kaminoans are so evolved. I mean, there's no way the Kaminoans have natural births. They're definitely test tube babies themselves. They've definitely been modified and created to become this evolved species. But who was the one who did that? I'm assuming there's got to be someone to a higher level who first conceived of this process who might have like pulling the strings behind the scenes, right? I would like to think to some degree that they have bigger affairs to deal with and that this was just like a pet project for letting this Republic army come into play and let the lower class, the lower class, the lower caste of sorts happen. I don't know if that's the best thing to pull off in Star Wars because that once you start talking about caste and classism, it's already happening with the clones and regular people, but it is still a kid show, and once you have to go into like that stuff, that gets a little bit darker. It's a show that could definitely do it though, but to what degree can it truly commit to something like that? I don't know. But hey, make a Chiss appearance. That's all I really need from that. Make a different Kaminoans outside of Camino, like a different group, right? Or a different objective. That'd be great too.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like Alien and Prometheus, and if you've seen those movies, that's kind of the that would be cool. I think it would be interesting. We've already seen on that facility Kaminoans in the tubes being tested on. We kind of assumed they were just initially trying to clone themselves, but maybe Kaminoans are a species that was created and put on Camino, and they're affiliated to all these other things. It would be cool.
Exactly.
The Chiss
Yeah.
would be interesting. I think Thrawn is still a ways away because I believe his book takes place in 11 BBY around there. But yeah, if we got some connection to the Chiss and the Gris conflict and all of that, we still don't really know what happens post Thrawn's disappearance with the Chiss ascendancy and the Gris conflict and all of that in the unknown regions. Yeah, it's there's a lot of stuff to, especially when you go into the cloning and the Snoke stuff and all of that, the Mandalorian connections. There's a lot of things that we could tie into. I think it would be it's a rare thing for us to get the Chiss in this, but
Yeah, yeah.
it would be cool nonetheless. Thanks so much for watching this segment of the Star Wars Lads podcast. If you enjoyed this content, please like the video by clicking the thumbs up button down below and subscribe to our channel for new Star Wars content every single week. If you want to watch our full discussion, click the video on the left. Or if you want to check out one of our other awesome videos, click the video on the right.